In this lecture, we're going to be looking at words connected with economics. And here are your 7 words. Boom, slump, GDP, deficit, surplus, macroeconomic and microeconomic. So the first word is boom. Boom. If there is a boom in the economy, there is a big increase or a rapid increase in the growth of the economy. Maybe people are buying more things in the shops, there are more jobs, so things are improving very quickly. There is a boom. Growth is happening. There was an economic boom in China during the 1990s. The real estate market was booming. It was increased. Prices of houses were going up. Government policy saw a cycle of boom and bust. Boom and bust are opposites. So when there is a boom, things are improving. When there is a bust, nobody has any money or few people have money. People lose jobs. Businesses stop working. They go out of business if there is a bust. So government policy is making things improve and then things get worse, then improve again, then things get worse. It's a very common collocation. Boom and bust. We talk about the boom years. The baby boom. So the baby boom is after the Second World War, when lots of soldiers, millions of soldiers went home to their hometowns, back to their wives. There was a baby boom because the soldiers and their wives made lots of babies. Lots of babies were born during the baby boom. It's when lots of babies are born, when the birth rate goes up. And an economic boom is very common too. Booming, boomed is a verb form. And some synonyms for boom: expansion, growth, soar, spurt, upsurge and upturn. So you can use boom as a verb and as a noun as well. You can say there was a boom. Now the word bust I mentioned just now, another word for bust is slump. Slump. It's when there is a decrease in economic growth or stagnation. So there are fewer jobs. People spend less money. For example, the collapse in the banking sector led to an economic slump. Net profits slumped by 41%. There was a significant slump in the housing market, so things went down. Housing prices went down. So we talk about an economic slump, a sales slump, housing slump, and a slump in something. So a slump in housing, a slump in sales, a slump in the economy. So here's that synonym for slump, bust. Decline is another word. Decrease. Downturn. Recession. Recession is when a country's economy stops growing for 3/4 of the year. And when that gets even worse, when a country stops growing for maybe years, we call it a depression. So a depression is worse than a recession. Your next phrase is GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product. So a country's gross domestic product, the GDP, it's a measurement, an indicator of how productive a country is. So the GDP measures the total value of goods and services produced within a country in 1 year, and it's often used to compare the wealth of countries and also of the wealth of the average person in each country. So for example, the GDP per capita of Poland is $13,500. Per capita means per head or per person. So that means the wealth of each person in Poland in 1 year is $13,500. 8.4% of Thailand's GDP comes from agriculture. So 8.4% of the wealth of Thailand comes from agriculture. South Korea's GDP increased by 3% in 2013. So we talk about GDP per capita, which means per head. Capita is the Latin word for head, and it means really per person. Annual GDP, increase in GDP, and a decline in GDP. There are no synonyms. You could use the synonym wealth, perhaps, but it's not. GDP is a very specialised word, so not really any synonyms there. Surplus is your next word. So a surplus is extra resources or money greater than what is needed. So a country with an economic surplus has more income coming in from things like taxes than what it is actually spending. So for example, the government's policies created a large surplus. An increase in tax revenues generated a budget surplus. So more tax but less spending, or spending stayed the same, so there was a budget surplus. That means that the government got more income than it spent. Here's a slightly different example, the eminent professor. Eminent is a very important, for a professor, very wise. So the eminent professor has a surplus of knowledge and wisdom. He has more knowledge and wisdom than he can use. Very good thing. He's so wise and so knowledgeable. He's got more than he will ever need. He has a surplus. We talk about budget surplus, economic surplus, an increasing surplus, a decreasing surplus. And some synonyms for surplus: excess, leftover, and unused. Unused money, unused resources. Now the opposite of surplus is this word, deficit. Deficit. A deficit is when you don't have enough resources, when you don't have enough money for what you need. So a country with an economic deficit spends more money than it gets in from things like taxes. So they're finally ready to cut the budget deficit next year. The Greek government ran a budget deficit of 3 billion euros last year. And there is a balance of payment deficit. A balance of payment deficit is when a country has more imports than it has exports. So there's kind of more products coming into a country than going out. Talk about deficit reduction, reduce the deficit, budget deficit. And this last one is attention deficit disorder. It's when children in school are unable to pay attention, to concentrate in the classroom. So maybe they often have what teachers call attention deficit disorder, or ADD. So synonyms for deficit: shortfall, lack, arrears, and shortage. So two more words, macroeconomic and microeconomic. Macroeconomic is to do with economics that is concerned with the big stuff, with major general features of a country's economy, such as the level of inflation, unemployment, or bank interest rates. Macro means big. So basically it means big economics, big scale, large scale economics. So for example, greater macroeconomic stability is a major aim of government policy. Macroeconomic policy failed to establish a stable rate of low inflation. Macroeconomic data suggests that there will not be enough young people entering the workforce in the next 10 years. So it's all the big stuff about economics, government policy, inflation, the workforce. So we talk about macroeconomic policies, macroeconomic management, macroeconomic stability, and conditions too. So macroeconomic, it's an adjective. To turn it into a noun, you just add the S. So the study of macroeconomic issues is just called macroeconomics. No synonyms, it's so specialised. And here's microeconomic, which is macroeconomics is a branch of economics that is concerned with the small individual features of a country's economy, such as the workings of a particular company or a particular market, or even the supply of a single product. Micro means small, so it's small economics, small scale economics. So the microeconomics module of the economics course is always popular with students. It's an interesting subject. Macroeconomics is concerned with the efficient supply of particular products. His study into the success of the iPhone was a model example of microeconomic research. And like macroeconomics, we talk about policies, management, microeconomic theory, macroeconomic reform as well. Again, it's an adjective. To turn it into a noun, add the S. So macroeconomics is the study of macroeconomic issues. So there are your 7 economics words: boom, slump, GDP, deficit, surplus, macroeconomic, and microeconomic.